Hello everyone, Brandon here, coming to you live from the spare bedroom. I'm a maritime archaeologist with the MAT, working mostly on offshore wind projects, but also on a range of research and database development work across the organisation. But my main passion is the visualisation and recording of hard-to-reach archaeological sites, and bringing these finds and places into the conscience of as many people as possible. Now, many of those people would never dream of putting themselves through the bother and expense of visiting these depths or far-flung places in the flesh, while others would relish the chance, but might not have the opportunity. I know that I'm extremely privileged to do the work that I do, and so whatever your thoughts on the matter, I hope I can share with you today a taste of our underwater work over the last 12 months, and show how we're trying to squeeze the most value out of every dive we undertake. So 3 sites to show you today out of a much reduced selection from the last 12 months in comparison to previous years. While we've missed out on some of the further flung destinations, we've still undertaken some really good fieldwork on sites closer to home. We'll be going some way offshore to explore the enigmatic wreck of a 19th century schooner and her unusual cargo in the image on the left. We'll also be squeezing in a bit of foreign travel from late last year with news from the Mortella excavations in Corsica, that's the centre image. But first up are the Chesil Beach protected wrecks, where we've been working with the Nautical Archaeology Society and Historic England, training a new and local team of site custodians. So leaving our offices at the National Oceanography Centre in Southampton that you see before you, we're off to Chesil Beach in Dorset, just a short hop over to the next county, across the New Forest, and zooming in here with a view over Weymouth and Portland Harbour and the Isle of Portland off to the right. Looking east, of course, we can see the 2 sites that comprise the Chesil Beach protected wreck sites. The inner being not many tens of metres from the shore, really close in and quite hard to get to in any sort of weather, and the outer site being 220 metres further to the south than the inner site. Our colleagues at the Nautical Archaeology Society have created a fantastic video that we've been using in our maritime bus to give a bit of a background and explainer to the site. So I'm going to take the liberty of showing you that now. What are the Chesil Beach wrecks? Sites 1 and 2 represent 2 clusters of cannons just off Chesil Beach. Despite being discovered in 2010, their identity still remains a mystery. Site 1. Chesil Beach Site 1 lies just offshore and consists of 8 large cast iron muzzle loading cannons and a concentration of archaeological material. Can you spot the cannons? Of course you can. This really nice interpretation was done by Wessex Archaeology when they investigated the site in 2015. It dates to the late 17th or early 18th century and lies in 11 metres of water. The guns are 24 to 32 pounders and are larger than would be expected for privateers or merchant ships, so they may be naval or land guns instead. Chesil Beach Site 2 lies approximately 220 metres to the south of Site 1 and slightly further offshore. 7 cast iron cannons lie on the seabed but without any accompanying archaeological material identified to date. And that's the interpretation of those guns. Take a note of the top middle one, we'll come back to that later. Not clear if the guns were cargo or armament, but the presence of possible iron shots still in the mouth of one suggests it was ready. It's likely that the site represents a wreck which, with evidence from the cannons, appear to date to the 17th century. Why are the wrecks at risk? I'll give you a clue, it's not his fault. As well as being home to many species of fish and plants, the wrecks slowly erode naturally with the tide. They were also the target of thieves in the 1970s, who used dynamite to try and find treasure. The Chesil Beach wrecks have been protected under the Protection of Wrecks Act 1973. This allows the designation of a restricted area around the wrecks to prevent the uncontrolled interference. What is the Chesil Beach Wrecks project? You may well ask. It's a joint initiative between the NAS, the MAT and Historic England to explore 2 protected wrecks off the coast of Chesil Beach. The project's working with local divers to help develop recording skills to use on the site. With practice in underwater surveying techniques, recording cannons and in photogrammetry, these newly trained archaeological divers will form a local team We'll continue to investigate and protect the wrecks throughout the project and beyond. Armed with their new abilities and know-how, we had a window of weather opportunity to visit the Inner Cannon site late last year. Now this site's really close inshore, and when the waves are crashing on Chesil Beach, to any degree really, it's very difficult for a vessel to get close in, deposit divers, and pick them up safely again. But we did have some wonderful conditions on this occasion, and the team were able to practice all of their recording skills, setting out tapes, getting key diagnostic measurements, laying out the scales for photogrammetry recording, while the MAT divers were able to proceed with gathering hundreds and hundreds of photos within a relatively short time scale, getting in and working between the divers to capture again as many images as possible. These photos have been post-processed and kind of give you an idea that we're in the balmy Mediterranean, but actually this is more realistic of what it was like to be on the site at the time. And when you see the video, you might think that doesn't look quite so easy to work in. Actually, this is pretty good. There's plenty of range, about 3 or 4 meters visibility, and it's enough to work and gather a lot of images at close range, which can then be overlapped to create a photogrammetric model. So what you see are the iron guns around the periphery. There's actually a lot more sediment than there was in the 2015 survey done by Wessex Archaeology. So a lot of the guns are quite covered up. You can just see in the lower left, there's one cascabel end of one of the guns poking out through the sand. But the main feature of the site are these incredible concretions, stacked, absolutely stacked, with tons and tons of cannonballs, and also in the closest part of the image at the moment you can see lots of broken elements of guns in pieces really, and why this might be is not entirely clear. Perhaps these are not guns in service, perhaps just ballast being transported with other ballast material that's now concreted together, or is this evidence of human interference? Of dynamiting from the 1970s, which is reported to have happened on this site, and this is some of the debris. Certainly the large concretion at the back there with the cannonball poking out certainly seems to have been split asunder in two, and human interference on the site clearly continues, as we see just coming around in the concretion closest to you an anchor resting in, and some what's probably trawl board wedged itself in the gaps there. But as we all know, in 2020 everything changed, and so for recording the outer site, unfortunately gone were the enthusiastic team of participants and volunteer divers, and we were left with some very odd socially distanced MAT divers and NAS supervisors keeping everything on track. So we managed to record all of the guns that we were expecting. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 butted up against each other. 6 off over here, and hang on, what's that one doing there? That's not supposed to be there. I don't know if you remember from the previous video introduction, we had a cannon that was in the center of the site, Cannon 2014, which is now 10 meters further to the north than it's supposed to be. Some commiseration, we've got an extra cannon. So instead of 7 cannons on the Chesil outer site, site 2, we've actually got 8 now, albeit with one of them having gone a little bit walkies. Here's a perspective view of the location where 2014 used to be situated, in a scour pit indicated by the dotted red line, a nice little scour trough infilled with fine sediment, suggesting that it has not been long removed. This really hasn't backfilled a great deal, and what it is filled with is very different from the surrounding context. Travelled a full 10 meters and hopped slightly over the cascabel of the adjacent gun to find itself in its current location. But the question is, how did that happen, and why? Was it divers lifting it carefully? There doesn't seem to be much drag marks or indication of something having bumped across the seabed. Or, as this is parallel with the beach, is this a trawler operating very far inshore? But one thing's for certain, it didn't get there by itself. So this is a digital terrain model, or DTM, which is derived from the same photogrammetry data, lots and lots of overlapping images that were used to create the 3D model that we saw in the previous slides. And this is a nice view of the data because it gives us a slightly different understanding of what's going on. So elevation and changes in height are shown in a false color map, with red being the shallowest areas and blue being the deepest areas of the topography. So straight away we can see that gun 2014 stands out. It's not nearly as embedded in the seabed as the other guns, although we can see a gradual shift from green to blue as the beach is shelving down from that side anyway. So that's pretty much parallel to the shore as Chesil Beach winds away from northwest to southeast. But what we can see around each of the individual guns, particularly those that are lying more across the tide, some nice scour areas. So all of the guns are depicted in green, apart from those two up there. And next to them, generally, you can pick out blue areas where erosion is happening as water accelerates around the blocking object and creates vortices which gradually remove the sediment and create scour pits and scour effects. And they're more pronounced depending on the type of sediment and the orientation of that object across the tide. So straight away we can start to understand what's actually going on with these sites. Where are the areas that are most prone to change, or most vulnerable, most exposed, especially when we start to compare that with previous data sets. And that will be the next step for these data sets and these sites, is to start to bring together all of the data and present that within a 3D viewer that will be hosted online and will be publicly accessible. And that should be available by the early part of next year, once we've got a lot further with the analysis and comparison with previous survey. So that's an exciting development to come, and it's one of the deliverables of this project. So we look forward to sharing that with you in due course. Okay, moving swiftly on from the Chesil Beach shipwrecks. Next, we're off to a remarkable shipwreck that we've been investigating following the hard work and dedication of one of our most treasured artifacts in his own right. Dave Wenders is the skipper of our regular charter vessel, White Spirit. He's been diving for decades and has amassed a wealth of experience which he's documented in 2 volumes of South Coast shipwrecks off the East Dorset and Wight, both full of shipwreck lore and stories of heroism and tragedy. One story that had him intrigued for several years was reports of a wreck carrying what appeared to be steam train components, what the ROV operator related to Dave as the train set. But the position given was in the old Decker system, and transforming the coordinates proved to be challenging. But while diving and investigating anomalies south of the Isle of Wight with a crack team in 2004, the divers returned to the surface reported large wheels, a lot of brass, and recovered an unusual nameplate. Further archival research undertaken by Dave revealed that this was not the nameplate of a vessel, but from a steam train. The fabled train set had been found. Pretty soon, Dave had a name, and shortly after, the full narrative of the loss of this vessel. Built by Canada Works Birkenhead, the cargo of 2 steam trains and 3 tenders was on its way from Southampton to Denmark in February 1865 aboard the 25-metre-long, 115-ton coastal schooner Brackenholm, itself built in Goole in 1857. This image shows a Canada Works locomotive from the 1860s, similar to the type lost in 1865. South of St Catherine's Point, Brackenholm encountered the British naval vessel Supply of 638 tons. Observing the collision rules, and while desperately signalling to the naval vessel, Brackenholm held her course until it was too late. Supply crashed into the wooden schooner in the bows, quickly sending the ship and her cargo to the bottom. Fortunately, the crew were able to scramble forward and onto the bows of the naval vessel before their own was lost. Dave asked the MAT to undertake a 3D survey in late 2019. The wreck lies in 37 metres, and in 2019 it was very dark with only a metre or so visibility. In September 2020 we tried once again to get a clearer view of the wreck, but on this occasion it was even darker, with visibility less than 1 metre for the most part. These images give you a sense of the wreck and the extent of our field of view on site, even with some of the best underwater lighting available thanks to Walkerlight. In the top left, we can see some of the train wheels and axles, of which at least 10 sets have been identified so far. Top right image shows you divers floodlighting the gloom. In the bottom right, we can see a section of exposed keel or keelson element and other wooden framing, which demonstrates that a significant part of this vessel is preserved below the cargo dunnage and seabed level. In the bottom left, free-swimming congers festoon this site in abundance. And they're very bold. This one came right up to the dome port and bumped on the glass, much closer than he appears due to the wide-angle lens. So despite some biological interference and challenging environmental conditions, we were still able to piece together a little bit of an orthomosaic of this site and get some 3D imagery out of the otherwise quite snowy photographs. What we have here is a top-down view of the wreck showing approximately 15, almost 20 meters in length. The main part is the cargo, of course, where you can see the axles and wheels stacked up, at least 10 pairs in there. Well, actually 9.5 pairs identified so far, and they're sitting on top of the chassis of what would have been the main chassis of the locomotives. To the right, in the lower right, you can see the boiler tubes that would have been heated inside the classic boiler that sits on top of the steam engine, with the funnels lying adjacent nearby, and the end plates making up the main components of the steam locomotives themselves. No sign of the tenders, and that's probably because of what we see to the lower left at the other end of the image, which is a lot of trawl net, and that appears to be snagged on some sort of metal framing, perhaps gunwale, although this is a wooden ship, but it looks like we've got what could be the bow area up at this end of the vessel, extending quite far away. So a lot of material buried under the sand, and a really exciting site with a lot to tell. This is what the steam trains on the seabed would probably have looked like. This is one of the only surviving examples of a Canada Works steam train from the 1870s, I believe, and it's now in Romania, of all places. So if you're a real steam engine buff, this might be on your destination once international travel is possible once again. What's clear from this work so far is that the site is both unique and under threat. We plan to return early next year with Dave, with a key aim being to set these features within the wider seabed context and understand how much of the original ship survives, while also involving experts from the world of steam locomotives to establish the significance of these long forgotten examples of British steam power. Our last stop is a brief introduction to the work we've been collaborating on in Galicia in northwestern Spain, and more recently in San Florent Bay in Corsica, studying and recording Iberian and Mediterranean shipwrecks with our partners CIAN, Archaeonautica, University Trinity St. David's, and Texas A&M Nautical Archaeology Department. Mortilla 3 is located in San Florent Bay in stunning surroundings. Mortilla 2 and 3 are early 16th century Italian vessels that were burnt at anchor in San Florent Bay when caught by surprise by their enemies. They lie in 40 and 47 metres and consist of the lower hulls of two vessels built in the Mediterranean tradition of carvel planking, with iron stave-built guns and formidable anchors over 4 metres in length, attesting to the size of these ships. The sites take their name from the Mortella Tower, a name which in Italian means myrtle, which grows on the island and at Myrtle Point where the tower is located. Nelson was so impressed with its construction that he spent a great deal of time trying to blow it up, and then imported the idea of what are now known as Martello Towers across the former British Empire. This is the team led by Dr. Arnaud Casanave de la Roche, with participants from across Europe and the diving and research vessel Usalesia. Our roles were to undertake excavation and 3D recording for the project. The main objective was to examine and record the keel and to understand the general construction in relation to other early Mediterranean examples, as well as a comparison with Iberian vessels being constructed by Genoese shipbuilders that are being considered within related programs. Kristin made this wonderful video that gives a really good flavour of the site. So much to talk about with all of these sites that we've looked at today, but so little time, and I just wanted to touch on plans for getting all of these results out in the public domain with the greatest level of impact. We've been returning to some of the data sets that we captured as part of the Forgotten Wrecks project several years ago and starting to reprocess these and see what kind of results we could actually get out with more modern computing power and software developments. And actually, there's a lot we can do to tell the stories of these sites and create immersive environments. And this is just a short capture from work undertaken by our colleagues at Trinity St David's when they were looking at including SS Gallia, a 1917 First World War vessel, within a sort of game engine environment, and just what you can achieve when you start to look at incorporating developments in software, in gaming, in film and television, and bring these kind of things that we're recording into those scenes. And just a very quick introduction into the type of impact that this work can have when bringing 3D assets, retopologizing, reprocessing, and setting these within immersive environments. So this is a VR environment you could put on your headset and swim virtually around, or you can use your game controller and really start to explore these up close and personal. And this kind of experience is what we want to generate with pretty much all of the 3D models and assets we've talked about today. Not content with just putting a model on a web page and letting people spin it around in circles, but actually take our public and our audience down to the sites to maximize impact, to really get an understanding of this material as it exists on the seabed. And that's not just for outreach, that's for collaboration. In these times when travel is so difficult, being able to virtually dive on a shipwreck site to discuss, to plan, and to interpret, well, this is fantastic. These are wonderful tools that are facilitating that kind of dialogue and exciting developments for the future. So without further ado, it only remains for me to thank Peter and Mark and all the team at the NAS, Dave Wenders, Historic England, Arnaud Casanave de la Roche, and all the team that are currently working in Ribadeo, Galicia. We miss you. And thank you for listening.